In 30 years, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Nothing fits nothing on a small block Ford. You can't interchange anything. They're not compatible. It's the worst engine design. You can't change parts out and make them better. My name's Walter. This is the GT350 Garage. I'm here working on my 66 Shelby. And what I've been doing is going through the cooling system and just refreshing everything after this car was stored for over 20 years. And the last time the cooling system on this car was serviced was over 30 years ago. The water pump was leaking, the timing cover wasn't looking real hot, and I decided it was time to put some fresh parts on this car and make everything ready to hit the road for summer 2021. I'm going to talk about the differences in small block Ford timing covers, water pumps, and harmonic balancers. And these things that I'm going to talk about are going to unlock kind of the secret code of making small block Fords work in whatever application you're working on. So with that, let's get to it. In the beginning, there were breather tubes. This is a 1962-63 era 289, 260, 221 timing chain cover. And the dead giveaway of how old this thing is it has a breather tube with an oil fill cap on it. This is the earliest version of the small block Ford timing cover. It was replaced by the same cover, but you can see that the breather tube hole has been plugged. And by plugged, well, it just was never machined, okay? These covers require the early style water pump with the exposed impeller and notice that it just drops in there. So this recess is actually the backing plate of the water pump. And the problem with that, and I'm going to bring it up here to the camera, is you can see all this pitting in here and on this ear and this ear. That pitting is corrosion from electrolysis and cavitation. These covers are notorious for leaking into the crankcase. Honestly, if you have an engine that's so old that it has one of these covers, unless it is a hypo in a Fairlane or a 289 Cobra or a 260 in an early slab side Cobra, if you're not dealing with an application that requires an OEM correct original cover, get away from this style cover. You don't want this style cover if you can help it, all right? And I say that because they're kind of a pain in the butt. This cover was relatively quickly updated to the cover and water pump that was on my Shelby. Now, this is a late 64 production, 65, 66, 67, 8, and 9 small block Ford timing cover. And yes, they did use this cover on early 302s. Now, this cover is for the passenger side water inlet, okay? And that passenger side water inlet is kind of a key feature to early small block Fords. There's some things you need to know about this style timing cover, okay? There's actually a groove here at the bottom of the timing cover, and it's designed to let any leakage that occurs in here out. This one got plugged up pretty good, and you can see that we had stuff living in the back of the pump, and it was leaking right here into this cavity. So this thing sat for 20 years with well, it had the same coolant in it for over 30 years. And coolant goes bad, guys. And when it does, it starts to eat things. It eats away at the gaskets. It eats away at the aluminum housings. So eventually, if you don't service your coolant, you're going to end up with leaks. So service your coolant and avoid leaks is the message I'm sending there. But with this cover, this is a 65 to 69 style cover. Now, they did use this cover on early Broncos well into the 70s, but that's only on Broncos. Okay? If you need a passenger side water pump, this cover will work. So will this cover. And this is an early 80s 351 Windsor cover. Okay. Again, we have the opening at the bottom so that it can let coolant leak out, but we need to pay attention to some differences. Very early covers, the seal's installed from the back side. Got to be careful taking them out that you don't mess up the cover. Got to be careful driving them in that you don't break the cover. The later style seal goes in from the front. I'm going to show you how that's installed here in a minute. Now, back of the cover is basically the same on all of these, but there's some little differences. All right. First thing I want to point out is these grooves next to the water passages. They need to stay open. That means you don't want to get them all plugged up with silicone when you're putting the gasket on. Okay. And I'm going to show you more on that here in a few minutes. Another thing that you need to know about these covers is later covers have a larger hole on the bottom on each side, and that's because there's a hollow dowel that's tapped into the front of the block on later 302 blocks. If you look at this early cover, the early cover uses a small hole, the same size as the front. It's the size of the bolt, basically, and it's the same size hole as the rest of the cover. That small hole versus that large hole means you can't install the early cover on a later block unless you take the dowels out. Keep that in mind. You'll break the cover if you try to force it. I don't recommend drilling the cover to make the dowel work because this is an engineered part and it's machined in one process. This hole for the seal is machined at the same time as all of these bolt holes. So the Ford tooling knows where to put these holes in relationship to this hole. I got news for you. I don't care how good you think you are. You're probably not good enough to be able to measure and make sure that you're going to have everything in the right place. So just don't try it, okay? If you get it off by 15 or 20 thousandths, which isn't a lot, you can preload the seal in this top half, either to one side or to the top, and you'll burn through the seal lip, and you'll end up having to put crankshaft seal in after crankshaft seal until finally you realize, hey, I got to take these stupid dowels out of this block and let the cover center on the balancer and then tighten it up. Okay? So, little stuff like that that you need to know about these covers. Let's get this cover out of the way. Let's go back to our sort of intermediate cover. This cover is representative of most covers from about 1970 to about 1985 on the 351 Windsors. There's a couple different variations. There's one that has a magnetic crank trigger pickup over here on the side that's cast in. It's two big lugs, okay? It exists. The timing pointers actually are bent so that they'll go over that. If you ever work on a late model 5-liter, you'll see that. That being said, there is one other little difference that you do need to know, and that is if you have an early cover and you go to a newer cover, including the reproduction 65 to 69 cover that I'm using from California Pony Cars, when we turn these up on their side, you can see a very important critical difference. The thickness of the cover where the bolts go through is different, okay? Your early covers are very thin, and it's really easy to break these covers if you over-torque them and you don't have them on straight. So these covers are thicker to allow the installation of that timing pointer on the front of the cover. And it puts the timing pointer in the right location. If you don't have the thicker damper and you try and put the timing cover or the timing pointer on with the earliest covers, it actually hits the cover over here on the side and won't bolt on. So I'll get that cover out of the way. Now, all of the covers I've shown you so far, the water pump is located or oriented so that the coolant is spinning with a clockwise rotation of the impeller, and it pushes the coolant clockwise into the timing cover. And this is kind of a dead giveaway on how to tell the difference between a standard rotation pump, clockwise rotation, counterclockwise rotation. The pump is spinning counterclockwise and it dumps the coolant in counterclockwise. If you try and mix and match these pumps, they don't line up. And to illustrate that, here's the clockwise rotation gasket on a counterclockwise rotation timing cover. Okay, make sure you can see that real good. What you have right here is you have an open coolant passage that's going to slip past the backing plate of the water pump, and it's just going to piddle all the coolant out right down the front of the timing cover right here. On this side, it won't leak as much on this side, but it's going to leak out the front hole if you try and put a standard rotation pump on there, because there's a hole in the water pump right here. Okay? So that's an issue, and that's something that if you try and mix and match this stuff, it just doesn't work. You cannot put a clockwise rotation belt drive system on a counterclockwise rotation pump. The pump will just sit and cavitate, okay? Because your pump is spinning this way, it wants to send the fluid backwards in the housing, and it just builds internal pressure in the pump housing. It won't send the coolant through the block the way it's supposed to. Tons of time I've seen it. There are some timing covers that are more of a football shaped gasket and don't have these two recesses for the lower plate bolts. Those pumps, there's clockwise and counterclockwise rotation versions, and they will interchange. And if you get the wrong one, you're going to be an unhappy camper, okay? I have also seen water pumps with the wrong impeller installed for the housing. That's right, reverse rotation impellers in standard rotation pumps and standard rotation impellers in reverse rotation pumps. And let me tell you, you're going to chase some cooling system issues with that one. You're going to think you've got the head gaskets in backwards. You're going to have all kinds of stuff going on. Why is this thing running hot? I put the correct pump on. What's going on? The guy that built the pump that day grabbed the impeller from the wrong bin. Okay? That's all it is. Or grabbed a bunch of them from the wrong bin, and you just happen to be one of a bunch of unlucky guys that got a pump that was made wrong that day. It happens, you know, especially on pumps that are very cheaply made. All right. I'm going to put a seal in the front of this timing cover. Block of wood behind the timing cover to support it. Now, this seal goes in the front on an original timing cover. The seal goes in the back. Don't try and put the one from the back in the front, it'll fall through. So you need the one with the lip on it. You can see the lip. Now, I have a driver that's for pinion seals on Ford 8/8s, and it just happens to work perfectly as a driver for crank seals. So, let's do this. Get it centered up. The block of wood in the back to support it. Get a little better. Needs to go a little bit further. And you can hear the sound change, and that's how you know that that seal has gone flush with the front of the timing cover, and that's it. Timing cover seal installed. Do not put any sealant around the outside edge. Don't do it. It'll make them leak. The red coating that you saw on the seal is the sealant, and it does a very nice job. Before you put this seal together with a damper, you want to put a little bit of grease on it. You can use engine assembly grease. I am not a big fan of over greasing this stuff, so I'll put a little bit of grease on my finger and just grease the seal with a film of grease. We just need a film, okay? We don't need big globs. We don't want to pack grease into the center of the seal, okay? This outside lip is a dust lip, and we don't want a grease packed up in there, but we do want the grease on the rear lip, which is the actual sealing surface, and that grease being on the rear lip is what's going to keep us from burning up the seal when we start the engine. Once the engine's running, engine oil is going to get to the back side of this seal, and it's going to provide enough lubrication with it. As long as your timing cover's aligned, you won't burn the seal, you'll be fine. So that's seal installation on a small block Ford timing cover. Okay, let's talk about water pumps and crank pulleys. What I've got here is the balancer off my 289 hypo, the water pump, and the timing cover, and this all came off the front of my car. If we look inside the balancer, we can see that the keyway is at the 12 o'clock position. Now, what you can't really see from this position, so I'm going to remove the water pump and try and show you here, is the timing pointer is pointing at 0 with that key in the 12 o'clock position. Put the water pump in place, we can see the timing pointer, and we can time this engine. Now, this balancer is a 4-bolt 351 Windsor balancer off of a 77 to 80 351 Windsor van motor that's had this spacer installed on it to set the depth correct to be able to use it with early pulleys on a Boss 302. It was a goofy setup, but it worked, okay? But you can see the amount of effort that went into somebody trying to make this work. I mean, they were literally forcing the issue to try and make this work, all right? So I've got my keyway installed at the 12 o'clock position, and if I raise this timing cover up, there's no timing marks on this side of the balancer. And that's because they're all over here, and 0 is right there at the tip of my finger. So this is where we have to have that bolt-on metal pointer to be able to reference 0. But if we try and put a passenger side water pump on, we got a problem. You can't see the timing pointer through the water pump inlet. If the timing marks, if they're between 10 and 11 o'clock, you need a water pump inlet on the driver's side. If your timing marks are over here between 1 and 2 o'clock, you need a passenger side inlet. The dead giveaway on where your timing marks are going to be is how many bolts are in the balancer, okay? If the factory balancer used 3 bolts, it's a passenger side water pump. That applies to all your early 289s, all 289s, okay? Early 302s, 68, 69 302s. Early 351 Windsors. Yes, 69 Windsors are a passenger side water pump. 70s are driver's side. You can't just drill out a 3-bolt pulley to bolt on a 4-bolt balancer or vice versa. It doesn't work, okay? And making spacers like this, well, let's be honest, it's kind of hokey. All right, it's a pain in the butt. It's got to be a hub-centric spacer. It technically needs to be pressed on, and then it needs to be put in a lathe. It needs to be machined. It's just more work than it's worth. You can buy a bunch of aftermarket balancers that have both patterns and that have spacers available to let you use whichever pulley system you need to use. There's options out there, and there's options to fit your budget. Unless you balanced the balancer specifically to your rotating assembly, I would strongly suggest try and run with a matched setup for the year of the vehicle you're running. Okay, and that means if it's up to 69 in a Mustang, you're passenger side, 70 and on, your driver's side. If you're running a 5-liter out of a Fox body, it's driver's side. That means you're going to have to change the radiator lower tank outlet to match the 5-liter water pump inlet. Or the only way you can do a 5-liter that I've been successful is to use the Ford Racing 50-ounce balancer for the 3-bolt pulley, and then you can use a passenger side water pump. That's a $300 balancer. It might be cheaper just to buy a radiator. These are the things that you're going to run up against and kind of deal with balancers, pumps, and timing covers. It's always a good idea to have some extra gaskets around, and fortunately, you can order individual gaskets. So if you're going to be doing some service on these, the temptation is to try and order a timing chain gasket kit. You can just order an individual timing cover gasket and an individual water pump gasket. And these are the correct gaskets for this engine. They're going to do what I need them to do. So I'm going to show you how I install these. All right, it's time to put some gaskets on stuff and start putting this thing together. Early on in my career, I figured out that silicone sucked, and I switched over and started using Permatex's Ultra Black sealant. Seals things up nicely, but I found it to be a little bit inconsistent. On a whim, I decided to try this stuff. It's Permatex's Ultra Gray gasket maker. Okay, what's the difference? Well, the Ultra Gray basically sets up like a rubber gasket. Best way to describe it: your end rail seals on the intake manifold. You lay down about a 3/8 inch tall bead across the end rail on the front and the back of the block, and you're never going to have a leak. It's literally the best stuff ever. I will continue to use this stuff as long as it's available. What if you're using it on a gasket? There's a technique to applying it, and it's fairly straightforward. You basically want to smear a thin film on. You want full coverage on the sealing surface of the gasket, but you don't need any real depth to it. You just want to cover the gasket with a film type layer of sealant. So let me show you how I install the timing cover gaskets using Permatex Ultra Gray.
Take your gasket out of the package and match it up to the timing cover. Put the sealant on the timing cover side of the gasket. A thin film that makes it so you can't see the gasket through the sealant is all you need. Apply it to the cover and then repeat the same process on the other side. At this point, you're ready to install the cover on the front of the engine.
All right, time to put on the timing cover. Now, you're going to notice that there's no gasket on the front of the oil pan. That's because the oil pan will be coming back off the engine. For right now, the oil pan is just there to keep dirt and foreign debris out of the engine. But we can go ahead and install the timing cover at this point and start sealing up the front of the engine.
If you're not taking the oil pan off, put some ultra gray in all of the corners, and use the gaskets from a timing chain gasket set to seal the engine up completely. It is a very nice water pump that they make, or timing cover that they make. I'll go ahead and put a couple of bolts in, just kind of finger tight here on the top. And this is just for aligning the cover. Okay, I'm pretty comfortable that the balancer went in, it didn't catch the seal, the timing cover is relatively centered, and you can see that the seal is basically centered up. Okay, so at this point, we would put in the lower bolts, tighten the timing cover to spec, and that would complete the initial installation of the timing cover.
All right, quick summary. There's a whole bunch of different timing covers for small block Fords, and I covered the majority of them here. The only ones I really didn't show are the MN12 SN95 covers for the short front dress, because they really cram stuff into the engine compartment on those cars. They're not something that you're really going to want to use on a typical early model car. There's no support for aftermarket water pumps really on that style pump. So it kind of leaves a little bit on the table, and if you can, just stick with the traditional long pump applications. We didn't talk about some of the 351 covers from the 80s or Explorer stuff from the late 90s up to the end of production in 2001. And that's because these covers just really don't get used when we're dealing with muscle cars or our typical Fox body type applications. Okay, anything that's 28 ounce balance. So your 221, 255, 260, 289, early 302 up to mid-year 81, and 351 Windsors. You can pretty much interchange whatever timing cover and balancer and water pump combination you need to for driver or passenger side water pump inlet, and for 3-bolt or 4-bolt pulleys. And it's pretty interchangeable. There's actually a lot of interchange there. You can feasibly put a 65 timing cover on a 97 351 Windsor roller block. Okay, it'll bolt right on. Just take the dowel pins out of the bottom of the block. Same thing with that late model cover. If you want a serpentine system on a 289, all you have to do is run a 87 to 93 style timing cover, would be my choice, with a 87 to 93 style water pump and a 302 balancer off of a late 70s application, and you can put a serpentina system onto a 289 and it'll work just fine. You just have to make sure that the balancer's the correct counterweight for the crankshaft and that it matches the timing cover and the water pump that you choose. If you need an aftermarket balancer that lets you use 3-bolt or 4-bolt, like I mentioned, professional products, Ford Racing, there are some applications out there. Pro Race, these balancers are available, and some of them are fairly affordable, a little over $100. So don't worry, you can get this stuff to work together pretty effectively on a budget. Some other little differences, if you're putting a serpentine drive system with a reverse rotation water pump on an early car with a front sump oil pump or oil pump pickup and front sump pan, you're going to need to drill a hole in the timing cover. The hole is not there. You can just drill the hole, and as long as you drill the hole the right size, match it up to another timing cover, you'll have no problem putting a dipstick in the front, put a little sealant around it, bolt it in, and you can just use your standard 289 or early 302 dipstick tube and dipstick, and it'll work fine. If you're using a late model 5-liter type block that had a rear sump, make sure you plug the oil dipstick hole in the side of the block if you're using a front dipstick, okay? Otherwise, you will have oil all over the starter, all over the exhaust, all over the undercarriage, all over everything. And it's not easy to clean up once the engine's in the car. So make sure you plug that. That being said, I hope you liked the video. I hope the information is valuable to your project or someone you know. I'm really trying to put some serious information into these videos that makes it one collected point for all of this information. And you can spend hours, days, even weeks trying to find all of this timing cover, water pump, and balancer information, and you won't find it on forums, you won't find it on Facebook. It's just not out there in one place. So that's the reason I brought it to this video and I shared it with you guys. How is it part of the cooling system? Well, I mean, if you got the wrong timing cover and you put the wrong water pump on, it can cause overheating problems like nobody's business. So it's just as important as any other part of the cooling system at that point. And I'm hoping that this saves somebody or multiple somebodies along the line some grief when it comes time to putting the project together. If you like the video, hit that like button. Love to have some feedback. If you got questions, leave a comment below, and by all means, subscribe to the channel if you'd like more information like this, and I will bring it. You can check me out on Facebook and on Instagram. The links are in the description below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me there as well. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.